The Galactic Council had heard many threats before. Species rose, species postured, and species fell in line once they understood their true place in the order of things. So when the human ambassador stood in the Grand Chamber and said that any attack on Earth or her colonies would be met with total war, the reaction was not fear. It was laughter. The chamber was a massive dome of light, built from a material that shimmered like liquid glass, floating in orbit above the neutral world of Thren. Delegates from over 200 species sat in tiered seats that spiraled upward into the dark. Some had 4 arms. Some had no arms at all and spoke through pulses of colored light. Some were so large they needed their own section of the chamber reinforced with extra supports. And in the middle of it all stood a single human woman, dressed in a plain gray uniform, addressing the most powerful government in the known galaxy. Her name was Ambassador Elena Cho. She had been sent to represent a species that, by every measure the Council used, should not have mattered at all. Humanity had only reached the stars a little over a century ago. They had no psychic powers, no natural resistance to vacuum, no biological weapons grown into their skin. They were, by galactic standards, painfully ordinary. Soft, short-lived, and slow to expand. But the Council had grown curious about Earth for one reason. Every species that had tried to test humanity's borders had stopped testing. Not because they had won, because they had disappeared from the historical record entirely, and nobody could explain why. The Zorbaxi Empire was the first to lose an entire scouting fleet near the edge of human space, 20 years ago. The official Zorbaxi report blamed a rogue asteroid field. Privately, none of their sailors who returned would speak about what they saw. Some retired immediately after. A few never spoke again at all. The Council chose to treat this as an isolated accident. Humanity was young, and young species sometimes got lucky. So when Ambassador Cho made her warning, the reaction in the chamber was amusement mixed with mild irritation, the way an adult might react to a child insisting they could beat up the neighborhood bully. "You say war," said Councillor Vashta, a tall being with skin like polished obsidian and a voice that echoed unnaturally in the chamber. "But your species does not have the numbers, the ships, or the technology to fight even a minor faction here, let alone the full might of the Council fleets. Please, Ambassador, do not waste our time with bluffs." Elena did not flinch. She had expected this. Her superiors back on Earth had told her exactly what to say and, more importantly, what not to say. "I am not here to convince you," she said calmly. "I am here to inform you. What you choose to believe is your decision. But know this. Humanity does not make threats we cannot keep. We simply do not see the need to prove ourselves before the fact." Laughter rippled through parts of the chamber again, though a few delegates, the older and more cautious ones, stayed silent. They had seen empires fall before from underestimating small things. A single virus, a single insect, a single overlooked variable. But they were the minority, and minorities rarely changed the course of history in rooms like this. The reason for the sudden tension was not a mystery. 3 months earlier, a coalition of minor species called the Ashan Compact had begun pushing into what they considered unclaimed border space, territory that overlapped with several human colonies on the edge of known space. These colonies were small, mostly mining and research outposts, populated by a few thousand people each. The Ashan Compact assumed, like most people did, that colonies this small would be undefended, easy pickings to expand their own territory and resources. They were wrong, but not in the way anyone expected yet. When the Compact sent a diplomatic notice demanding the colonies be evacuated within 30 days or be annexed by force, Earth's government did something strange. They did not panic. They did not send more diplomats. They did not even respond to the Compact directly. Instead, Earth's Unified Defense Command quietly issued a single order to a fleet that most of the galaxy did not even know existed. It was called the Void Fleet. Officially, humanity's military strength on record consisted of a modest defense force, a handful of orbital stations, and colony militias armed with weapons roughly equivalent to what most low-tier species used for local security. This was true. It was also incomplete. For nearly 40 years, hidden away in construction yards built inside asteroid belts far from any trade route, in secret partnership between nations that had once been rivals on Earth, humanity had been building something else entirely. Nobody outside a tight circle of engineers, scientists, and military officers knew the true size of the Void Fleet. Even most of Earth's own government representatives, including some sitting in the council chamber that very day, did not know the specifics. All they knew was the name and the promise behind it. If Earth or her people were ever truly threatened, this fleet would answer. The technology behind the Void Fleet was not stolen or gifted by some more advanced species. It was built the hard way, through decades of relentless human stubbornness. Physicists who refused to accept galactic assumptions about faster-than-light travel found new methods by ignoring what the experts of other species said was impossible. Engineers designed ships not around comfort or tradition, but purely around function, brutal efficiency, and one uncomfortable truth that other species tended to forget. War is won by whoever adapts fastest, not by whoever has the most impressive-looking ships. Back in the council chamber, none of this history mattered yet. Ambassador Cho finished her statement, bowed slightly out of respect for protocol rather than submission, and stepped back from the podium. The council moved on to other business, treating the human warning as a footnote, a strange little outburst from a fledgling species that clearly did not understand the scale of the galaxy it had been allowed to join. Counselor Vashta-Rin leaned toward his aide as the session continued. "Humans," he muttered. "So confident for a species that has barely left its own solar system a lifetime ago." His aide, a younger and more nervous being named Trill, hesitated before speaking. "Sir, if I may, our analysts still cannot explain what happened to the Zorbaxi fleet 20 years ago, or the 3 merchant convoys that vanished near human border space over the last decade. The official records call them accidents, but coincidences," Vashtu interrupted. "Not everything mysterious means something sinister. Space is vast and dangerous. Ships are lost. That is simply the cost of expansion." Trill did not argue further, but he did not feel reassured either. He had studied human history as part of his diplomatic training, back when Earth had first been allowed a seat at the table. He remembered reading about 2 devastating wars fought entirely between humans themselves less than 200 years ago, wars that had reshaped their entire civilization and forced them to rebuild from rubble not once, but twice. He remembered a phrase from an old human military document that had stuck with him, something about how humanity's greatest strength was never brute force, but the refusal to know when to stop. Far away from the chamber, in the cold silence beyond the orbit of Pluto, deep inside a hollowed-out asteroid base that did not appear on any official council star chart, alarms began to flash red across dozens of command decks. The 30-day deadline set by the Ashan Compact had just expired. Reports were coming in from the border colonies. Compact warships had entered human space without waiting for a formal declaration, confident that no real resistance would meet them. Admiral Marcus Okafor sat in his command chair aboard the flagship of the Void Fleet, a vessel 3 kilometers long named simply Second Chance. He read the incoming reports twice, then looked around at his bridge crew, all of them steady and quiet, all of them having trained for this exact moment for years without ever truly believing it would come. He pressed the comm switch that would send his order across the entire fleet, hundreds of ships hidden in the dark for decades, waiting. "They didn't believe the warning," he said quietly. "Let's make sure they understand it now." The order went out. Engines that had never been tested in real combat began to hum to life across the fleet. Ships built not for parades or intimidation, but for one single purpose, began moving out of the shadows and toward the border. The Galactic Council would learn very soon that humanity had never been bluffing at all. The first ships of the Ashan Compact reached the edge of Meridian Colony, expecting an easy victory. Their sensors detected only the colony's small defense grid, a handful of outdated turrets, and 2 aging patrol ships that had been decommissioned from Earth's regular fleet years ago and sold to the colonists for cheap. The Compact commander, a stout and confident being named Dosker Vell, smiled at the readings. As expected, Dosker said to his officers, "The humans sent nothing. Their threats were empty noise for the Council's benefit. Begin landing procedures. We take the colony within the hour." His crew relaxed at the announcement, some even joking about how they would divide the mining rights once the human settlers were relocated. Compact transport ships began descending toward the colony's main settlement, escorted by a modest line of warships that had crushed similar minor colonies from other species without any real resistance. What none of them noticed, not on their sensors, not on their scanners, not even with their most advanced detection systems, were the shapes gathering quietly at the far edge of the system. The Void Fleet had a well-earned reputation among the small circle who knew of it, a reputation built entirely on one core design principle. Their ships did not simply hide. They were built to be nearly invisible to standard sensor arrays, using stealth technology decades ahead of anything the compact or most Council species had ever developed. The first sign of trouble for the compact came when their communications with the lead assault ship, the Vandrel's Pride, suddenly went silent. Dosker frowned at his tactical display, assuming a minor technical glitch. Communication glitches were common enough on the frontier. He ordered a status check. The status check never returned an answer because the Vandrel's Pride no longer existed. It had been torn apart in less than 4 seconds by a coordinated strike from 12 human interceptors that had approached completely undetected, using the natural debris field around Meridian's outer moon as cover. There had been no warning shot, no demand for surrender, no dramatic standoff. Just silence, followed by silence. Dosker's confusion turned to alarm as 3 more ships in his formation went dark within the next 2 minutes. His sensor officer frantically tried to identify the source of the attacks, but the human ships used a jamming technology that scattered and confused compact scanners, making it nearly impossible to pinpoint their exact location until it was far too late. "This is impossible," Dosker muttered, watching his fleet formation crumble on the display in front of him. "The humans have no fleet capable of this. Where are these ships coming from?" The answer arrived moments later when the true scale of the Void Fleet finally decloaked around the compact formation. Hundreds of human warships appeared seemingly out of nowhere, forming a perfect encirclement around what remained of Dosker's assault force. The design of these ships was unlike anything the compact had studied in their intelligence briefings on human technology. They were sleek, dark, and covered in strange geometric patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Admiral Okafor's voice came through on an open channel, translated instantly into the compact's native tongue by onboard linguistic systems that had been prepared for this exact confrontation long in advance. "You were given 30 days to reconsider your approach," Okafor said, his tone calm and without any trace of anger. "You chose not to listen. This is not a negotiation. This is a demonstration. Withdraw your remaining ships immediately, or share the fate of your lead vessel." Dosker's hands trembled slightly as he considered his rapidly shrinking options. His pride told him to fight, to prove that a supposedly inferior species could not simply intimidate a proud commander of the Ashan Compact. His instincts, however, screamed at him that something was deeply wrong, that the humans had clearly been preparing for this exact scenario far longer than anyone had suspected. Against his pride, Dosker chose caution. He ordered a full withdrawal of his remaining ships, retreating back across the border with far fewer vessels than he had brought. The retreat, however, would not be the end of the matter. Word of the humiliating defeat spread quickly through compact military channels, and within days, reports reached the Galactic Council itself. The council chamber, usually a place of calm diplomatic discussion, buzzed with confusion and concern as delegates reviewed footage and reports from the Meridian incident. Councillor Vashta Run, who had so confidently dismissed Ambassador Cho's warning weeks earlier, now sat in stunned silence as tactical analysts explained what little they understood about the human fleet's capabilities. "Their stealth technology alone surpasses anything in our current databases," one analyst explained, projecting holographic images of the battle reconstruction. "We estimate the human fleet involved in this engagement numbered at least 200 vessels, none of which registered on any long-range sensor network until the moment they chose to reveal themselves." Trill, the young aide who had earlier expressed concern about dismissing human warnings, could not help but feel a mixture of vindication and dread. He glanced toward Councillor Vashtu, whose expression had shifted from arrogant dismissal to something resembling genuine worry. "How is this possible?" Vashtu asked quietly, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. How did a species so young develop technology capable of hiding an entire fleet from every known detection method? The answer, though none of the council delegates knew it yet, lay in humanity's unique approach to problem-solving. While other species had spent centuries perfecting technology based on established scientific principles passed down through generations of steady, predictable research, humans had a habit of ignoring established limitations entirely. Where other species saw impossible barriers, human scientists saw unsolved puzzles waiting for creative solutions. Meanwhile, aboard the Second Chance, Admiral Okafor received word of the Council's reaction with a grim sense of satisfaction, though not celebration. He understood, perhaps better than anyone else in the fleet, that this was only the beginning. A single demonstration would not be enough to guarantee lasting peace. The galaxy had grown accustomed to viewing humanity as a curiosity, a minor player unworthy of serious consideration. Changing that perception would require more than one victory. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "long-range sensors are picking up increased military movement from several other Council-aligned species near our border regions. It appears word of the Meridian incident has spread faster than anticipated." Okafor nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Good. Let them see. Let them understand exactly what kind of mistake they almost made. Prepare full fleet readiness reports for Earth Command. We are not finished yet." This was merely a warning shot heard across the stars. The true test is still ahead of us. As the Void Fleet regrouped near Meridian's outer defense perimeter, quietly repairing minor damage and preparing for whatever response the Galactic Council might choose to send next, the true scale of what was coming remained hidden even from the humans themselves. The Ashan Compact, humiliated and desperate to save face, would not simply accept defeat. Other, larger factions within the Council were already beginning to question whether humanity's technological advantage extended beyond simple stealth capabilities, and whether a larger, more coordinated response might be necessary to reassert galactic dominance before humanity's confidence grew any further. Far across the galaxy, in a heavily fortified command station belonging to one of the Council's most powerful military factions, the Kryvex Dominion, a decision was quietly being made that would soon push humanity's newfound reputation to its ultimate test. The Kryvex had long viewed themselves as the true military power behind the Council's authority, their war fleets responsible for maintaining order across 100 star systems for over 1,000 years. To them, a single embarrassing defeat suffered by a minor faction like the Ashan Compact was hardly cause for genuine concern. Yet as more detailed reports of the Void Fleet's capabilities reached Kryvex High Command, a few of their most experienced strategists began to feel the first uncomfortable stirrings of doubt that would soon prove to be entirely justified as humanity's true strength began to reveal itself to a galaxy that had underestimated them for the very last time. The Kryvex Dominion had not built their reputation through diplomacy or clever tricks. They had built it through raw, overwhelming force, applied consistently across 1,000 years of galactic history. When a species stepped out of line, the Kryvex sent fleets large enough to blot out the stars above a planet's surface. When a rebellion threatened to spread, the Kryvex crushed it before it could take root. Their military doctrine was simple and had never failed them before. Overwhelming numbers solve every problem, no matter how strange or unprecedented that problem might seem. High Command met in a chamber built entirely from black metal salvaged from 1,000 different conquered worlds, a deliberate symbol of their dominance over the galaxy. Grand Marshal Threx Dorwin, a towering figure even among his own tall species, stood at the head of the table studying reports on the Meridian incident with growing irritation rather than concern. "Stealth technology," he said dismissively, tossing the data pad aside. "Impressive, perhaps, against a minor faction like the Ashan Compact, who could barely organize a proper invasion fleet in the first place. It means nothing against real strength." His strategic advisor, an older and more cautious officer named Celavrax, hesitated before speaking. She had served the Dominion for over 3 centuries and had seen enough surprises in her long career to know that dismissing an unknown threat rarely ended well. "Grand Marshal, respectfully, our sensor analysts still cannot explain how 200 human warships evaded detection completely until the moment of engagement. This is not a minor tactical trick. This represents a genuine technological gap that we do not currently understand." Threx waved off her concern with a heavy hand. "Numbers, Sela. It always comes down to numbers in the end. We will send the 9th Battle Fleet, 800 ships strong, directly to the human border. Let them hide behind their clever technology all they like. 800 ships cannot all be ambushed by 200, no matter how invisible they think themselves to be. Sela did not argue further, though the uneasy feeling in her chest did not fade. She had read the full report on Ambassador Cho's warning to the Council weeks earlier, and something about the calm, simple confidence in the human woman's words had stayed with her since. Species that bluffed tended to posture, exaggerate, and threaten loudly. Elena Cho had done none of that. She had simply stated a fact and walked away. Word of the Kryvex Dominion's mobilization reached Earth Command within days, thanks to a network of quiet informants and long-standing intelligence contacts that humanity had carefully cultivated across dozens of minor species over the years. Nobody in the wider galaxy suspected that Earth's diplomats, so often dismissed as junior members of the Council, had spent decades building relationships with smaller factions who resented Kryvex dominance and were willing to share information in exchange for future consideration. Admiral Okafor received the intelligence report aboard the Second Chance with the same calm focus he had shown during the Meridian engagement. He gathered his senior officers in the ship's central strategy room, a circular chamber lined with holographic displays showing real-time positions of both Council and human fleet movements across the border region. 800 ships, said Captain Layla Ibrahim, commander of the 2nd Fleet Division, studying the projected numbers. That is nearly triple what we committed at Meridian. The Kryvex believe in numbers, Okafor replied. It has worked for them for 1,000 years. They will not change that approach easily, not even after seeing what happened to the compact. Should we be worried? Asked Commander Diego Reyes, the fleet's chief tactical officer, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Okafor allowed himself a small, tired smile. Worried, no. Prepared, always. Numbers only matter if you can bring them to bear effectively. Our advantage was never simply hiding. It has always been about controlling when and where a fight actually happens. This was the core truth about the Void Fleet that neither the Ashan Compact nor the Kryvex Dominion yet understood. Human military doctrine, shaped by centuries of brutal, hard-earned lessons from wars fought entirely among themselves, had never valued simply matching an enemy's numbers or firepower directly. Instead, it valued information, timing, and denying an enemy the ability to fight the battle they had planned for. A fleet of 800 ships was only dangerous if it could actually locate, track, and engage its target under conditions it controlled. Over the following 2 weeks, as the Kryvex 9th Battle Fleet made its slow, deliberate approach toward human border space, broadcasting its presence openly as a show of overwhelming intimidation, the Void Fleet did something that confused Kryvex scouts entirely. It disappeared, not simply hidden through stealth technology this time, but strategically withdrawn from the border entirely, pulling back deeper into human-controlled territory. Kryvex sensor officers reported the sudden absence of any detectable human military presence near the border colonies, and for a brief moment, Grand Marshal Threx allowed himself a satisfied laugh. You see, he told Sela during a brief strategy update. They flee at the mere sight of a real fleet. The stealth trick worked once against fools. It means nothing against genuine strength. Sela studied the sensor reports carefully, noting something that seemed to trouble her far more than it troubled her commander. Grand Marshal, they have not simply retreated. Our long-range scans show human colonial defenses have also gone quiet. No increased local militia activity. No emergency evacuation orders, nothing consistent with a species preparing to abandon their territory. Perhaps they simply understand futility when they see it. Threx replied, though his confidence wavered slightly at her words. What neither Threx nor his analysts understood was that human colonists along the border had received clear, calm instructions from Earth Command weeks earlier. Continue normal operations. Trust the fleet. Do not panic. And do not draw unnecessary attention through visible defensive preparations. It was a strategy built on patience and discipline, qualities that the Kryvex, despite their reputation for military strength, had rarely needed to develop after 1,000 years of unchallenged dominance. As the 9th Battle Fleet crossed deeper into what Kryvex charts marked as contested border space, Now completely convinced that the human retreat represented genuine fear rather than calculated strategy, Admiral Okafor watched their advance from a hidden command outpost buried deep within an unremarkable asteroid field roughly 3 light hours from the fleet's projected path. "They are exactly where we predicted," Commander Reyes reported, studying the live tactical feed. "Formation is spread wide, standard Kryvex doctrine for maximizing intimidation value during a slow advance. Their sensor coverage has gaps consistent with typical Kryvex fleet patrol patterns. Then we let them keep coming," Okafor said quietly. "Patience. We do not need to defeat 800 ships all at once. We need to make sure the 800 ships never actually get the chance to fight the battle they believe they are walking into." Over the following 72 hours, the human fleet executed a strategy that would later be studied extensively by galactic military academies, though at the time it appeared to Kryvex scouts as nothing more than continued human absence. Small human strike groups, no larger than a dozen ships each, began systematically targeting the 9th Battle Fleet's support and supply vessels, striking swiftly from concealed positions and vanishing before any organized Kryvex response could be mounted. These attacks were never aimed at the fleet's powerful warships directly. Instead, they targeted fuel convoys, communication relay ships, and repair vessels, the unglamorous but absolutely essential support structure that any large military force depended on to function over extended operations. Within days, minor but steadily accumulating problems began to plague the 9th Battle Fleet. Communication delays grew longer as relay ships mysteriously fell silent one by one. Fuel reserves ran lower than projected as supply convoys failed to arrive on schedule. Grand Marshal Threx grew increasingly frustrated as these seemingly minor incidents accumulated. Unable to identify any single decisive engagement he could respond to with the overwhelming force his doctrine relied upon. "Ghosts," he muttered during a tense strategy session, staring at reports of yet another missing supply ship. "We are being harassed by ghosts who refuse to show themselves for a proper fight." Sella, watching the pattern unfold with growing understanding, finally spoke the uncomfortable truth that had been forming in her mind since Meridian. "Grand Marshal, I do not believe the humans intend to fight us directly at all, not in the way we understand combat. I believe they intend to make it impossible for us to fight effectively, until we have no choice but to withdraw simply to survive." Threx dismissed her concern once more, ordering the fleet to press forward regardless of mounting logistical troubles, confident that sheer numbers would eventually overwhelm whatever clever human strategy lay behind these irritating but seemingly minor setbacks. He did not yet understand that this confidence, this same overwhelming certainty that had served the Kryvex Dominion for 1,000 years of unchallenged conquest, was about to be tested against an opponent who had spent its entire violent history learning exactly how to defeat forces far larger and more powerful than itself. The 9th Battle Fleet pressed onward for nearly 3 weeks, its formation growing steadily more ragged despite still numbering close to 700 combat-ready vessels. Grand Marshal Threx Dorwin refused to authorize a full withdrawal, viewing any retreat as an unacceptable admission that 1,000 years of Kryvex military doctrine could somehow be undone by a species barely a century into interstellar travel. His officers, trained under the same doctrine, largely shared his confidence, even as the mounting losses to supply ships and communication relays continued without any sign of the decisive confrontation they expected. What none of them yet understood was that Admiral Okafor had never intended to fight the battle the Kryvex were preparing for. He intended to fight a different battle entirely, one built around patience, precision, and the accumulated weight of small, unanswerable losses. Every supply ship destroyed meant less fuel for the war machines that depended on it. Every relay ship silenced meant longer delays between Kryvex command decisions and their execution across a battle line stretching hundreds of thousands of kilometers. By the 3rd week, the effects had become impossible to ignore even for Threx. Fuel reserves across the fleet had dropped below 60% of projected levels. Several smaller escort vessels had already been forced to power down non-essential systems simply to conserve energy for their main engines. Morale, once unshakable given the fleet's reputation and history, had begun to fray as crews whispered rumors about ghost ships and unseen enemies, picking them apart one piece at a time. Celavrax requested an urgent private meeting with the Grand Marshal, finally speaking without her usual careful restraint. Grand Marshal, I must insist we reconsider our approach immediately. We are bleeding resources with nothing to show for it. The humans have not lost a single warship in this entire campaign, yet we have lost over 60 support vessels and thousands of crew members to these engagements. Threx's pride, battered but not yet broken, finally cracked under the weight of undeniable numbers. What would you have me do, Sela? Order a full retreat and hand the humans an even greater victory than the one they already claimed at Meridian? I would have you accept that our doctrine does not apply here, Sela said firmly. The humans are not fighting us as an enemy fleet in open battle. They are fighting us as a disease fights a body, weakening us slowly from within until we can no longer function. We need a different strategy, or we need to withdraw entirely and reassess. Before Threx could respond, alarms blared across the command bridge. Sensor officers reported an enormous energy signature building rapidly near the fleet's forward position, unlike anything they had detected from the small human strike groups that had harassed them for weeks. This was something far larger and far more concerning. Admiral Okafor had judged the moment carefully. The Kryvex fleet, weakened by weeks of supply disruption and stretched thin across a wide, disorganized formation, had finally reached the exact point in space that human strategists had selected months earlier during initial planning. A narrow gravitational corridor formed by the combined pull of two nearby gas giants, a region where standard Kryvex sensor arrays suffered significant interference due to natural magnetic distortions. Now, Okafor said quietly to his bridge crew aboard the Second Chance. This is the moment we prepared for. Full fleet deployment. Let them see exactly what has been hunting them. The Void Fleet decloaked in its entirety for the first time in this campaign, revealing not the 200 ships that had engaged the Ashan Compact at Meridian, but the full might of humanity's hidden military strength. Over 600 human warships appeared simultaneously across the gravitational corridor, perfectly positioned to exploit the sensor interference that left the Kryvex fleet unable to properly track or respond to the sudden appearance of such an overwhelming force. Grand Marshal Threx stared at his tactical display in stunned disbelief as human ships materialized seemingly from nowhere, surrounding his already weakened and disorganized fleet from multiple angles simultaneously. This is not possible, he muttered. Our intelligence reports estimated their total fleet strength at no more than 300 vessels. Perhaps, Sela said quietly, watching the same display with a mixture of dread and grim vindication. Our intelligence reports were wrong. The battle that followed lasted less than 4 hours, though it would be studied and debated across galactic military academies for generations afterward. Human warships, using coordinated tactics built around decades of simulated combat scenarios against numerically superior forces, targeted Kryvex command ships and communication hubs first, deliberately fracturing the fleet's ability to coordinate a unified response. Individual Kryvex squadrons, cut off from central command and unable to communicate effectively with neighboring units, were forced into isolated engagements against concentrated human firepower. Threx watched helplessly as squadron after squadron reported catastrophic losses, unable to formulate an effective counter-strategy fast enough to matter. His 1,000 years of military doctrine, built entirely around overwhelming numerical superiority in open, straightforward engagements, had no answer for an enemy that refused to fight that kind of battle at all. By the time Threx finally issued the order to withdraw, nearly half of the 9th Battle Fleet had already been destroyed or disabled beyond repair. The retreat itself proved costly, as human strike groups continued harassing the withdrawing Kryvex ships for several more hours, ensuring the psychological impact of the defeat would be felt long after the physical battle had ended. Word of the Kryvex defeat spread through the Galactic Council with far greater urgency than the earlier Meridian incident had generated. This was not a minor faction like the Ashan Compact suffering an embarrassing setback. This was the Kryvex Dominion, the Council's most powerful military force, decisively defeated by a species that most delegates had considered a curiosity barely worth serious discussion just weeks earlier. Counselor Vashta Run sat in stunned silence during the emergency session called to address the crisis, watching detailed battle reconstructions that analysts had compiled from surviving Kryvex sensor logs. The numbers alone told a story that seemed almost impossible to believe. A fleet 3 times larger than the human force, representing centuries of proven military doctrine, had been systematically dismantled in a matter of hours. How is this possible? Vashta finally asked, addressing the chamber's senior intelligence analyst. The Kryvex Dominion has not suffered a defeat of this magnitude in over 4 centuries. The analyst, a nervous being from a minor scholarly species that specialized in strategic analysis, hesitated before answering honestly. Counselor, our best assessment suggests the humans possess military capabilities significantly beyond anything currently understood by Council intelligence services. Their technology appears advanced, certainly, but the more concerning factor may be their strategic doctrine itself. They do not fight the way established galactic military theory suggests any rational species should fight. Trill, still serving as Vashta's aide, finally found the courage to speak his mind fully in front of the assembled council. If I may, Counselor, human history includes extensive records of conflicts fought entirely among themselves. Wars that reshaped their entire species not once, but multiple times across relatively recent history. They have collectively spent longer studying the practical realities of warfare, at a devastating personal cost, than perhaps any other species currently represented in this chamber. We assumed inexperience because of their short time among the stars. We failed to account for how much experience they carry within their own species' history. The chamber fell into an uneasy silence as the weight of this realization settled over the assembled delegates. Species who had spent millennia expanding peacefully or through relatively controlled, ritualized conflicts found themselves confronting an uncomfortable truth. Humanity's relative newness to galactic society had nothing to do with genuine inexperience in the harsh, practical realities of warfare. Far from the council chamber, aboard the Second Chance, Admiral Okafor received confirmation of the 9th Battle Fleet's retreat with quiet, measured relief rather than triumph. He understood, perhaps better than anyone else present, that this victory, however decisive, would not end the conflict. If anything, it would likely provoke an even larger, more coordinated response from a council now thoroughly alarmed by humanity's demonstrated capabilities. Casualties? He asked quietly, though he already suspected the answer given the careful planning that had gone into selecting their battlefield. Minimal, sir, Commander Reyes reported, his voice carrying a mixture of professional satisfaction and quiet respect for the cost paid on both sides. 12 ships damaged, none lost. The Kryvex, by contrast, lost over 300 vessels and an estimated 40,000 personnel. Okafor absorbed this information without visible celebration. War, even necessary and successful war, was never something to take pleasure in, regardless of which side suffered greater losses. Send word to Earth Command, he finally said. The Kryvex Dominion has been dealt with for now, but this will not be the end of it. The Council will not simply accept this outcome without further response. We need to prepare for what comes next, because I suspect the Galactic Council is about to stop underestimating us entirely, and that may prove far more dangerous than their previous arrogance ever was.